Hi, David. Hi, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, good evening. In the South Africa, it's late afternoon, evening. Evening, Keshav. I hope you're well on your side of the world.
All good, David. Can we just check the presentation?
All right, cool. Let me quickly share it. There we go.
All right, all right. I think this is great. So we'll just wait for the time to, and then we can start.
Yes, no problem.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, or afternoon, depending where you are in the world. I hope you guys are well and getting ready for your exams. I know exams season is just quite literally around the corner. And thank you for joining us for the last session in the program. This is session number 4. I hope you guys are enjoying it. Please, make sure that you're on the MOOC site. I will share the link again in the chat. And make sure you do all the activities that's required from you in that MOOC. I'm sure you guys are learning a lot. Again, this evening, we've got Keshav that's going to be going through all the materials with you guys. So let's enjoy the session, and I'm handing over now to Keshav.
Hello, everyone, and it's such a pleasure, and thank you, David, for putting this session together once again. Today is a very, very important day that we are gathering, and again, I'm very grateful to all of you for joining in and doing so in the right time as well. Um, David, is it possible that today, before we start the session, if I want everyone to listen to a short video, if we can hear it together for maybe 5 minutes? It's
Yes,
on
no, that's
YouTube.
perfect. We can definitely do that.
Okay. So can I just send you should I post the link? Where do you want me to post the link?
I think post it in the chat, and I'll quickly open it from there.
All right. All right. Thank you. So while we put that link in the chat while we put that link, what I want to tell you a little bit about that link very quickly is that this is the speech of South Africa in the actual UN General Assembly just yesterday. And I don't know how many of you are following the UN General Assembly proceedings this year, but it just started yesterday, and I thought it'll be great to hear South Africa's General Assembly speech. We'll listen to it for five minutes, maybe 6-7 minutes, and then I would love to hear your thoughts on, because just how Mr. Ramaphosa is speaking here, that is a very good way. I was very impressed with his remarks yesterday, and I actually thought that it's a great way to start today's session. So, David, if I can just hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Keshav. I'm ready on my side, so let me share quickly for everybody. But just let me know when it's time to stop.
The chair of the Assembly, we take this opportunity to thank the United Nations Assembly to give us a chance to speak. 30 years ago, South Africa was born as a new nation, equal, united, and free from apartheid. we adopted a new constitution as the birth certificate of our new nation. Our first democratic elections brought the tyranny of apartheid to an end, a system that this General Assembly has declared to be a crime against humanity. It adopted Resolution 2202A in 1966, as later endorsed by the Security Council in 1985. The United Nations was a beacon of hope in our quest for justice. The great wave of solidarity of the peoples of the world, led by the United Nations, turned the tide against apartheid. Today, democracy flourishes in South Africa. We have a progressive constitution, an entrenched human rights culture, and strong institutions. We have laws to advance equality and programs to protect society's most marginalized and vulnerable. We continue to transform our economy so that it is in a more competitive position to create jobs, to attract more investment, and that it should benefit all. South Africa is a party to global treaties on human rights, gender equality, children's rights, refugee protection, and environmental protection. A few days ago, South Africa also endorsed the pact that charts the course for a better future for global governance and towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. As signatory to the Paris Agreement, we are contributing our fair share towards the global effort and have a just energy transition plan to guide our carbon journey and climate resilient development. Through the African Union, we are working to advance Agenda 2063. We're involved in mediation and conflict resolution across our continent and actively contribute to peacekeeping missions. Our political culture has evolved and it continues to mature. We have just held our 7th free and fair general elections since our democracy, paving the way for the formation of the government of national unity. 10 political parties have coalesced around a common agenda for economic growth, job creation, poverty eradication, and sustainable development. South Africa is in a new era, an era of great promise. In what some have called our second miracle, South Africans of all races have rallied behind the government of national unity. We are making headway in resolving some of our most pressing challenges. Our economy has started to improve and investor confidence is on the rise. Our country's prospects look bright and we look to the future with great
David,
hope.
I think we can stop the video here and
South
come back to
African
our presentation. Okay. So again, thank you everyone. I hope that you were able to follow the remarks of the head of the state from South Africa, Mr. Ramaphosa. I would love to on chat. I'd love to hear from you, like your observations. You know, we have been trying to understand how to research, how do we make our speech, how do we use expressions, how do we do research and find out about international law. Did you notice, like, did you notice certain things, and were they now making more sense to you? So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts in the chat. So I'd love to know from you what you noticed, a couple of things that you saw. It could be anything that you observed about his way of speaking as well. It can be anything. So we'll just acknowledge a few points that everyone makes, and then we will move forward. Okay, yeah, he greeted everyone, and he got to the point about the country's goals. This is very important. I really like that you pointed that out. Um, the next comment, the next comment is UN SDG 2030s are directly opposite, are in the opposite direction to Agenda 2063. No, no, not at all. The UN I mean, Agenda 2063 is towards the progress of the African continent, but and a lot of values, a lot of things are definitely aligned between them. The UN 2030 SDGs. So yeah, that's there. Now he spoke very calmly and politely. Absolutely, this is the way you will hear most diplomats, most head of the states talk about issues. So that is something that we can definitely learn from him. And I do feel he's an excellent speaker for sure. So he's one of the great examples of how we can speak at a model UN. South Africa is a treaty to Paris Agreement. Wonderful. So you did pick that up, that he talked about the Paris Agreement, and he said that we are a party, like we have signed the Paris Agreement. He also talked about the Pact for the Future, which again, like someone has just mentioned. So thank you again. And alliances, yes, he's also inviting people to align with South Africa. Moving forward, yeah, like he mentioned South Africa's aspirations. He was very straightforward on all the social aspects of South Africa. He spoke about economic progress. Wonderful. So in the later half of his speech, what he does is he starts talking specifically on the Israel-Palestine issue as well, and he has some really strong words. And I urge all of you to actually see I actually would love for you all to see the whole video. And right now, as we speak, for that matter, the UN General Assembly is ongoing, and it's all live streamed on YouTube. So you can actually just hear any delegate speech like that. Right now is a great time to actually be doing this model UN together, because you can really see the way that different heads of the states are also speaking. So, and more importantly, I hope that doing this Model UN MOOC now makes a lot more sense to you in terms of understanding and sort of demystifying, as somebody was saying the other day, demystifying the way the politics are happening and the way these speeches are delivered, right? So, so thank you, and keep bringing your points in. Please do keep bringing all your points in. I really appreciate it. Okay, now today's session is going to talk a lot about basically foreign policy and international relations. This is a very important part of our session. So the first part about we will discuss today is briefly about international relations, a little bit about the key concepts that we generally come across, and then we will be understanding about foreign policy and what is foreign policy of a country, how do we, find out our own foreign policy, what are the different aspects that we should be mindful of, and what we will do is then we will and I request all of you to relate today's session as like a continuation of the previous session, which was about research and preparation. So we will come back to certain sections of the previous discussion that we had last week about developing your country's viewpoint. Specifically, it was one of the things we had talked about last time. So let's let's start discussing this whole idea of international relations. And And we will be discussing a lot of concepts and a lot of different things today. So again, just keep putting your thoughts in, and keep putting your questions in the chat, please. So let's go to the next slide, please. Right. Okay. So what is international relations somehow? That's the first thing that we're trying to understand today. It's a study and area of practice where we are understanding how countries basically engage with each other, how they interact with each other, and not just the interaction between two countries, for instance, India and South Africa. International relations is also trying to understand how countries are engaging with international organizations, with corporate sector, with multinational organizations, with NGOs. How are they responding to situations which are happening globally? They could be political, economic, social, security oriented. Any of these issues can be discussed, and we are in international relations trying to understand how all of this interaction is happening. And when you think about it, this is a lot of that is exactly what we are trying to enact or simulate in an MUN, in a model UN. We are trying to take on certain situations and then create a framework around our country's perspective, and then we are coming together with different delegates, different representatives, and having an engagement with them. So this is so MUN is a great tool even sometimes to understand IR. um, so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. Now, a few key concepts that I want to talk about, and that you will keep hearing these buzzwords in MUN while you research, and these concepts are again things that will always you will keep confronting them, whichever topic you engage with in a model UN. Uh, so uh, so let's start discussing it, and I will come to this idea of the changing in foreign policy that some of you are mentioning in the chat. So I'm quite in fact interested to understand from your perspective, like what you are all thinking back in South Africa about the foreign policy. So the first concept that we are looking into is sovereignty. Sovereignty is essentially the principle that a state has authority and independence to govern itself without any external interference. So, so when we say sovereignty, one example that we've talked about is, for instance, a country like Japan could making its own internal decisions without any outside intervention. So one question that I can probably ask you, for instance, is can we call Palestine right now a sovereign country or a sovereign state? If I don't want to use the country as a term right now, but can we call it sovereign? And what your understanding is about sovereignty so far? Any example that comes to your mind? Okay, so let's start hearing from all of you. That's the first one. The second is what we call as a nation state. A nation state is something where it's a firstly you have to understand that it's a very Western notion. The idea of a nation state comes from an international relations theory, which is just fairly Western in nature, especially when we look at the African context, because what a nation state theory does is it tries to create a political entity which is which says that you have to have, for a country to be called a country or a nation state, it has to have a defined boundary, it has to have a stable population, it has to have a government, and it has to be recognized by the international community. So it creates these four distinct, basically four distinct criterias that it fits. Whereas when we look at the African continent, a lot of before the Europeans decided to cut up Africa into these latitudes and longitudinal blocks, and which they created their own idea of nation states. The movement the movement of people was quite fluid, and it was and the whole idea of a nation state did not exist, for instance, here. So this is a more Western notion, and again, like this is something that, however, in today's world, like that has become the very cornerstone of international treaties. You have to be a nation state to be a part of the UN. You have to be a nation state to sign a treaty like a Paris Agreement. So that is something that is there about the nation state. The next is what we call as diplomacy. It's a word that we have been using, so many times. And that is the idea of using negotiation and dialogue between countries to manage their issues, manage their relationships. So is Israel dealing with Palestine or Lebanon right now with diplomacy, or they're dealing with war? I think we know the answer, like it's fairly straightforward issue. So diplomacy, for diplomacy, you need to have two distinct parties that are being diplomatic with each other. And when we are looking at diplomacy from the context of an MUN, we are usually trying to look at a nation state, a sovereign state, which is being diplomatic with another sovereign state. So that is the context of diplomacy. Okay, so I hope I'm not going too fast here. Before I go to the next slide, let me take a couple of points from everyone here. Um, so, uh, okay, so so some of you have written that sovereignty is where you can print your own money. I think there is a lot more to sovereignty than being able to, printing your own money. Sovereignty also means being able to take each and every decision of your country without a lot of interference. And I think this is very connected with this question: can organizations like IMF interfere with a country's sovereignty due to money it owes? That's a very, very interesting question. Here, I want to quickly dive into these two terminologies for all of you, and I'm putting them in the chat. Uh, so I'm just putting them in the chat for all of you. One is called as de facto, and the other is called as de jure. Okay, so de facto and de jure, these two words I'm just introducing to the conversation today, and they are closely related to law. And what that word means is the first word is de facto. De facto means in fact. In fact, so it means one is de facto, which is in fact, and the second is de jure, which means in law. So when we talk about sovereignty of a country that owes money to IMF and IMF is interfering in their business, that country is in law still sovereign de jure. So they have a de jure sovereignty, but in fact their sovereignty is being messed around with for sure. So that is where you have to start understanding that sometimes things on paper are much more different than what happens in reality. So the fact that you are saying that IMF can influence a country's decision, definitely it does compromise, sovereignty in a more real way. But on paper, it will that coercion, forcing a state to change, to make changes, is not considered officially breach of sovereignty, because your government is still agreeing because of whatever factor to what IMF is trying to tell you. So that is like some about how sovereignty usually works. Um, is Palestine a sovereign state? Does sovereignty depend on recognition from others? No, not really, right? Sovereignty is more about your ability and the authority to take independent decisions. The whole idea of recognition mostly comes from a nation state perspective, not a sovereignty perspective. So I just want to clarify that with regards to the last comment that has come up in the chat. And if you keep bringing more points, I will be very happy to address a lot of these points. So and please remember that we are trying to be extremely technical about each point, which is why I will tell you, okay, this is sovereignty, but this may not be. Palestine is not a state. And actually, if you now look at the UN General Assembly, uh, Palestine has been recognized as a state, but not as a member of the UN. It has been recognized as the state of Palestine as an observer member at the UN. So people are now recognizing Palestine in as a state. So yeah, like this is again very important. When you start looking at the UN General Assembly on YouTube, you will start seeing these little nuances that okay, Palestine is sitting there with the whole delegation, and it says state of Palestine. Earlier on, much before that, it used to say the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Uh, at that point, Palestine was not considered a state, but now it is definitely considered a state. And the question that comes more is now about its full membership at the UN. And I'll be happy to discuss what the implications of a membership to the UN will be. But I'll continue with the next set of concepts till then with everyone. The next is what we call as balance of power. A balance of power is a very, very important idea, especially when it comes, in terms of negotiations, in terms of just peace and stability in a region. A balance of power is a situation where the economic and the military power is distributed between countries. What that means is that, like, for instance, right now we are seeing this Russia Ukraine war happen, but somehow different big countries are not coming in and directly fighting with Russia. One of the key reasons is that the balance of power over there is distributed in such a way that they totally can't defeat Russia, uh, and they can only hurt Russia to some extent because the economic power, the balance of power between them is fairly, you can say, proportionate in nature. As against that, the balance of power between Israel and Palestine is completely different, is absolutely totally different. So, when the balance of power is generally equal between two parties, they are able to not have large scale conflicts most of the times. If they have a large scale conflict, it can potentially generally turn into a world war. Uh, but when the balance of power is fairly equal, then you will see like countries like even India and China. They may not be very fond of each other in terms of their relations, but they're not fighting a big war because the balance of power is somewhat equal, if not like it's not disproportionate in nature. So I hope you've understood that. The next is globalization. I think you understand the idea of globalization, the interconnectedness of countries, where trade, technology, communication, cultural exchanges, all of that is happening. So, an iPhone is manufactured in one country. Apple is owned by another country, and then it is people are buying iPhones in all possible places. So that is also globalization in every way. That we are all economically connected, and we are all able to see like Messi and Ronaldo on the television. We culturally we can see like things happening together. So that is the interconnectedness of countries. The final one is what we call as non-state actors. Non-state actors are very important, and I want you to remember that this is the a term we used as against state actors. So, for understanding non state actors, we need to quickly understand state actors. State actors mean anything that is officially, directly, legally related to a particular country. Like, I'll take an example of Iran because it's a very, very relevant one, and right now we are seeing that happen. Iran has its own armed forces. And Iran also funds Hezbollah, right? It supports Hezbollah. Uh, the Iranian army is a state actor of Iran, but Hezbollah is a non state actor because they are not officially sanctioned or related to the government of Iran. They are merely getting support, but they are an independent entity. So non-state actor is anything that is not a nation state in international relations. So it could be, and don't confuse it like in terms of any positive or negative connotation. There is no positive or negativity to the term associated. Non-state actor can be a terrorist organization also. Non-state actor can be an NGO also. Non-state actor can be a UN agency also, or it can be a multinational corporation as well. So so that is basically about the non-state actors. Now, before I go further, I will just quickly address a couple of points that you mentioned here. Why the UN is not trying to make countries to have equal votes? Okay, uh, that's an important question that you've talked about. See, as we had discussed this in the first session that UN has different organs. Uh, in the UN General Assembly, it has every country has an equal vote. Every country has one vote each. In the Economic and Social Council, generally there are 54 members, and every country has an equal vote. There are very few countries, very few bodies in the UN where this inequality in voting exists. I'll just quickly take two examples for you. One is the Security Council, where we had discussed the whole veto power, where one vote, a no vote by one of the permanent five members can, reject a resolution very easily. The second is in IMF. And what happens in IMF is that your voting rights are proportional to the amount of contribution you're making to the IMF in terms of gold reserves. So, what that means is that the amount of wealth you have, the voting right is proportionate, your voting percentage is proportionate to that. Because of which, countries which have a lot of gold, for instance, the United States, have a much higher voting right, uh, much higher voting right than another country which may not have that much wealth. Now, there is another very interesting aspect to it that you can understand about the same. Uh, that is that one interesting thing about unequal voting rights, specifically in IMF, is that they change over time. If your wealth changes in the at the if your amount of wealth that you possess it changes, uh, you can change your voting right. And one classic example for that is China, for instance. So China has seen tremendous economic growth in the past few years, and that has resulted into a greater influence in terms of their voting. I just want to talk about one more quickly concept with you. That is, and it's not a concept like it happens a lot, is that one thing is that you have a voting right, but the other thing is how much influence you carry. So, for instance, if there is a vote that is happening on some issue in the UN General Assembly, and you are a powerful country economically, and you have a lot of influence over many countries, then you are using your influence to also influence those countries to vote in the way that you want them to vote in. So you may only have one voting right, but if that country tells the other countries that we will give you XYZ benefits, and we will give you a big development grant, but you have to vote in a certain way, so then they do vote in a certain way. Okay, so when we say big country, I think we are not just talking about the population size or the borders, the land area. We are also talking about its economy, and we are also talking about its military influence. We are also talking about its alliances. So so yeah, that's that about all of these discussions. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, I think we have done a lot of international law, so I'll skip that one. I'll come to multilateralism. Multilateralism is the whole idea that multiple countries can work together, usually within a framework of an international organization on agreements to achieve certain results. So one key example is, for instance, the Paris Agreement, or the UNFCCC climate negotiations that happen under the UN framework for Convention on Climate Change. And here I want to tell you something very, very interesting. We often have this whole idea, a whole notion in our minds that a small country cannot do much at the UN. But I want to tell you a very fascinating thing that has happened just 1 week ago. The UN, and in fact, Mr. Ramaphosa had also referred to that, was that the UN has adopted what we called as the Pact for the Future, Pact of, Pact for the Future. This is supposed by the UN, it's supposedly a very important kind of an agreement between countries. And the two countries which actually made it possible, which really pushed for it, uh, you, I can tell you one of them is Germany, but I'd love for you to guess the second country, if possible. Which other country do you think would have had this big influence in having this Pact of the Future adopted by the UN? Any of you? I'll just give you a couple of seconds to, type out your answer. Okay, it's not South Africa, but we are. Let me give you a hint. It's somewhere close to South Africa. Okay. In the meantime, while some of you are trying to write, your responses, I'll just take this question. Is South Africa one of the developing or a developed country? So usually when we look at, Namibia is the correct answer. So very well done, whoever responded. It was that a guess or did you Google search it? But yeah, that's the correct response. So I'll just complete the Namibia bit and then I'll address this question. So the reason I wanted to share this particular instance that happened with Namibia is to tell you that it's not that the UN is just one place where it's always about the big countries and the economically powerful countries and the Western countries. A lot of times, several developing countries have played a crucial role in adoption of many of these important agreements. Like for instance, one of the major climate change agreement that had taken place, Botswana was one of the key countries which had sort of pushed for that. So so that's about so that is to remind you that it's not just UN is not always just about like big countries doing their own things. If we are as a country, we are a proactive country at the UN, like things can happen. Okay, is South Africa one of the developed or developing countries? Which countries are an example of developed countries? Okay, so in order to so when we look at the developed versus developing discussion, the usually adopted criteria is what we call as, and I'm just typing it out, uh, the GDP per capita. It is also called as per capita income sometimes. Per capita income means uh, basically you take the total income of a country and you divide it by the population size. And then you see how much money does that country have. So that is the quantitative criteria and then there is a particular cutoff in terms of dollars that you see as the average income, and that decides whether a country is a developing or a developed country. Please remember, it is not about the absolute size of an economy. Like for instance, India is a developing country, despite being one of the top 10 big countries in terms of its size economically, because our per capita income, which is like per person income, is not very high. So that is how we find out whether developed countries are developed or a developing country. And then there is something which was adopted, which you may have again come across. I'm putting it in the chat. Is the Human Development Index, which is also called as the HDI. This is a very important thing that happened. The Human Development Index said that it should not just matter about how much money you have, they also introduced two other key parameters in this whole discussion to understand which countries are developed and which countries are developing. And the other two things that they basically criteria that they put was health and education. So they said that it's not just about the amount of money your country is making, but it is also about the health and it is also about the education levels in your particular country. And then, each of them have like elaborate parameters. Like for health, it will be your average life expectancy, which means how much is the average age of a person when they die in a country, and and so on. So every year, the UN Development Program, the UNDP, publishes the HDI report. I absolutely encourage you to Google search it and find the HDI report. And it actually gives a very comprehensive progress report for every country. Yeah. So thank you for your question once again. Let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, human rights, we've already, so I think we all understand. But again, like human rights is the idea, belief that every individual because is entitled to basic rights and freedoms, um, which must be protected by countries and the international law. And they deserve those rights not because they are citizens or non-citizens. They deserve those rights not because they're rich or poor or they're tall or short. They deserve those rights because they are human beings. And I think that's a very, very important idea. That is the very foundation of a lot of international law as well. So, okay, so there's one question is, uh, what is the difference between human rights and gay rights? Okay, so I think that's a very important question, and I can like sort of extend that question to even tell you like what is does everyone have a right to own an iPhone? Is that a human right or not? Like, so does everyone have a right to a dignified life? So gay rights are definitely, considered a part of human rights when we look at human rights because the whole idea about human rights is being able to live your life with freedom and dignity. And when you look at LGBTQI community and their rights, sexuality is a very important part of somebody's freedom of expression and their way of living. So a part of dignified life is definitely your sexuality and your gender. And gay rights, that is why, are an integral part of human rights. So, and again, like these rights can be different in different places. However, and one more thing is that at certain places you will see that the context of these rights changes because of the progress that is made by a particular country. So if the whole world is living in a like imagine if we are in 2100, uh, like if we are in 2100 AD and everyone has internet, at that point in time, if somebody does not have internet will also be considered as a human right. Okay. Okay. So this the remark that you have made, you have to remember that every human right or any fundamental right, all of them are subject to laws. Like if I have a right to do whatever I want, I just can't simply like wake up on a random Sunday and stab people because I want to stab them. So similarly, like even the LGBTQI rights that they have, it's not so much about them having something and you having to see it all the time. It is more about for instance, should gay people be allowed to marry each other? Should they be allowed to be themselves? Should they not be just sent to prison or death penalty for being the way they are? Okay, so there are there are like a lot of complexities around many of these rights. But I really like this one thing that you have stated here, Colette, which says that gays are human beings and they are entitled to human rights. So that is true, and you have to also start seeing this context of human rights in terms of refugees, which we are talking about. Do children have human rights? Yes, absolutely. Children have human rights, and on top of that, you have to remember that they also have children's rights, which is given to them as a part of the Child Rights Convention, which we had all talked about the last time that we were talking about international law. So. Uh, so one thing I can recommend to you is that you should Google search something called as I'm typing it out in our chat, which is called as the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. This declaration was adopted by the UN and all the countries in 1948, and it gives out 30 distinct rights, human rights, which are applicable for everyone around the world, which includes yourself as well. So I'll just recommend you to for sure read about it, and it will really like resolve a lot of your questions. Okay, uh, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this sort of concludes our discussion about international relations. And now, within international relations, we are going to look at foreign policy. And foreign policy is really like one of the most important components of our conversation in an MUN conference. So you have to be again like pay close attention to the foreign policy discussion. So the first thing is, what is foreign policy, right? So foreign policy basically means that you are a nation state, you are a government, and you are, how do you deal, how do you engage, how do you interact, how do you manage things with anything that is external, anything that is foreign to your country. Uh, So, and what is foreign to our country? What do you think are things that are foreign to a particular country? If you can just put it on the chat. What are things that are foreign to any country? If anyone wants to put their response in the chat, you can try to think like just a very simple question. What is foreign to South Africa? What is external to South Africa? Or what is foreign to India? Okay, while you're typing your responses, I will just quickly address a very important point. Should criminals have human rights, like a murderer, steal someone from else's right to life? Do they deserve human rights? Right. Uh, so criminals do once again, they anyone who's a human being deserves human rights. Now, what that means is that, of course, that doesn't justify a murder. I think that is exactly what I had said to you. That, however, uh, a human right in case of someone with a death penalty might mean, for instance, giving them proper conditions in a prison, giving them food, giving them adequate, sunlight, giving them water, so human rights are just not like, sometimes even these basic issues are not available in prisons for people. So those are things that that are a part of human rights as well when it comes to criminals. So somebody has written workers. Absolutely. So immigrant workers are people are outside. Anyone outside who's not a citizen of South Africa is foreign to South Africa. Anyone who is the oceans, the Indian Ocean outside the boundaries of South Africa is foreign to South Africa. Other countries are foreign to South Africa. Someone has written that laws are foreign, religion, customs, cultures, definitely fuel. You've written, so yes. So all of these can be considered foreign. People can be considered foreign. Natural resources can be considered foreign. Companies can be considered foreign. So what that means is that uh, a country must have clear policies in dealing with all of those things. MNCs, very nice. That is also foreign. So all of these are things that are foreign, and other countries' governments are foreign, for instance, and anything that involves a country's government to deal with all of that is basically a part of its larger foreign policy. Okay, so that is something that is what we can understand as foreign policy. Broadly, if we have to categorize it, organize it, that we can understand it from diplomacy, trade, defense, definitely international aid perspective. And it is basically the idea behind having a proper foreign policy is being able to manage very clearly your relationships between your country and the other person's country. So let's go to the next slide. Uh, what is the purpose of foreign policy? Listen, now these are probably the most important things that we are discussing right now in the whole MUN conversation, because when you have to discuss interest, your country's benefits, what you have to really look out for in any negotiation when you have to set your negotiation frameworks, this is what this is what we are talking about. Okay, so pay a lot of attention here, and again, like, bring in your questions. I'll be very happy to discuss it. So the first purpose of having a proper foreign policy is national security. That means that whatever external threats are coming to your country's way, your foreign policy must ensure that you are safe, that your country's safety and your country's citizen safety is usually the first priority for any government whatsoever. That is the first one. And one example that we have mentioned here is the American foreign policy on counterterrorism after the 9/11 attacks. Uh, the next is economic prosperity. So once we have looked at your national security, the second, usually the most important one, and is the economic prosperity. So looking at trade, investments, access to resources is the second priority for usually having a good, well-defined foreign policy. Uh, Here we see China's Belt and Road Initiative as an example of foreign policy. Uh, Somebody has written colonizing is a foreign policy. You can say that. In fact, right about the time when colonialism was very, very popular and colonialism turned to imperialism, a lot of that was a part of foreign policy, that countries just wanted to gain maximum power, maximum regions under their influence, have monopoly over colonies and all of that. So definitely, you are absolutely, right on point when you say that. So these are the first two. Can we go to the next ones, please? Yes. Okay. Diplomatic relations and global influence. Diplomatic relations is a very, very key part of having a foreign policy, because if I know your foreign policy, your country's foreign policy, and I am another country, then I can actually decide how should I deal with you based on understanding of your foreign policy. So if you have a friendly foreign policy towards other countries, then as another country, and if I also have a friendly foreign policy, then we may actually, explore collaborations, we may have trade together and so on. And you see that with European Union, for instance, that strong diplomatic relations have led Europe to come together and, like, deal with a lot of threats as a collective unit. Um, then the next one is global influence. Global influence means that many times you, as countries, are trying to, put a lot more influence outside, because they somewhere feel that it will also turn towards their ability to, get the best interest for their own country, their ability to drive the maximum profits from different markets, and so on. So, uh, so that is the second, that's the fourth point, that is global influence. Okay. The next one. Can we, yeah. Okay. The next is what we call as peace and stability. So certain countries are always very interested to, facilitate peace in different countries. And one example, like when we look at this whole history of the Israel-Palestine conflict, is the Oslo Accords, where Norway tried its very best to play a neutral party in facilitating talks. And right now, when we look at this whole Israel-Palestine issue, you will see that Qatar and Egypt, as well as US, are trying to, like negotiate some kind of a treaty between these countries. So that is the one foreign policy objective of peace and stability. The next is humanitarian goals, addressing the global challenges which are there, like climate change, poverty, human rights, and you will see a lot of countries have these aid programs, especially like many developed countries, and now you will see even developing countries giving a lot of aid to different countries to start these projects related to education, human rights, climate change, poverty, a lot of them. So, right. I'll just address this couple of points before we go to the next slide, where I said US is trying to, negotiate the agreement. Uh, I hope I didn't say that US is a neutral party. US has always said it very, very clearly that they are in solidarity with Israel. Just like Qatar has said very, very clearly that they are in solidarity with Palestinians. The example of Norway is a very, very different example for Oslo Accords. But here in the case of the negotiation between Israel Palestine, you hardly have any neutral party here. All parties have some or the other very, very strong affiliation. Yeah. Okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Uh, and I know there's a question about definition of refugees and accompanying people. I will come to that question. I recognize that question. I will be addressing it in some time. The next couple of then now what I've tried to do is that after taking global examples, I've tried to take more South African context, and you can basically help me and sort of give your perspective in chat as well about these issues. So the first is national security, and the example I've taken here is South Africa's involvement in peace missions across Africa, for instance, with the DRC, where the South African National Defense Force has always contributed troops to strengthen the peace and stability in this region. The second example for economic prosperity is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which South Africa has actively supported. In fact, the speech that we were all listening to by Mr. Ramaphosa, you will eventually he also talks about this agreement in his speech at the UN General Assembly. So that is another example. The third is diplomatic relations, is again like looking at South Africa's participation with African Union and trying to support the peace process, which is under the African Union's mandate, like the South Sudan peace process. So these are three examples for South Africa that I've tried to take. Can we go to the next slide, please? And I want to ask you in chat, or you can do that even through like reactions. Do you know about these things? Do you know about South Africa's involvement in peacekeeping, for instance, with DRC? Or do you know about the African Free Trade Agreement in the African continent? Do you know about Africa's participation with the African Union, for instance? So if you have heard about these things, now is the time to start making sense of them from a foreign policy perspective, because that is how you will have to understand foreign policy of different countries when they're allocated to you. Okay, next slide, please. Right. While we go to the next slide, let me just address this one issue about African jurisprudence. Let me just let me very quickly tell you a little bit about this whole idea of jurisprudence. And I think you understand it a lot more than me, and India has a very similar kind of a situation. So that is where I think there is some similarity between Indian context and African context, is that we have a lot of diversity in cultures. So there is no one African culture that you can say that is against, homosexuals or gay couples. If you actually read the certain cultures in the African context, you will see the presence of homosexuality as well. So I think it's always a very dangerous thing to say that uh, within the African jurisprudence, this happens or this does not happen, because there is so much diversity in traditions and customs across Africa that you will have to look at literally each and every tradition and jurisprudence before saying that the whole of Africa is like has a jurisprudence or does not have. So that is something that I definitely recommend you. And because what happens is when we say something about the whole continent or the whole culture without recognizing the different aspects of that particular culture or the diversity, we take away from the richness of that culture. Like we take away from the thousands of years of civilization of that culture. So that is why I always say that, especially when it comes to countries which have a lot of diversity in cultures, we should always we should avoid making blanket sort of statements about whether something is there or not, and we should always look at the finer nuances within that. So yeah, that's there. Um, can we go to the next slide, David? Thank you. Okay. Just the last 3 points about the purpose of foreign policy and the African context is South African context is that when we look at global influence, then looking at South Africa's role in BRICS, South Africa has been actively talking about reforms in the Security Council, and if you actually listen to the speech that I had shared with you, you will see that Ramaphosa also addresses that. He talks about the need to reform the Security Council and give vetoes to more countries. So BRICS is a very crucial part of that global governance reforms. So you definitely look into that. Then the peace process, South Africa's mediation with the Zimbabwean political crisis. So again, and I think South Africa has played a huge role when we look at the African context. It's one of those leading countries that way when it comes to influencing things within the African continent. So yeah. And finally, humanitarian goals. South Africa's support for initiatives in addressing the HIV epidemic in Africa, for instance. And again, I think this is to sort of put some light and give you some examples, which are the South African examples of foreign policy. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. Now we are just quickly understanding certain crucial aspects of foreign policy. So whenever you are given a country in the MUN, for instance, if you're given Canada or India or South Africa or Cameroon or Nigeria, Lesotho, any country that you're given, these are the things that you have to research about. So the first one is its diplomatic relations. So how is the country negotiating? How is the country relationship with other countries? State vis-a-vis another state. That is the first one. The second one is the international trade, investments, and sanctions that are looking at advancing your economic interest. So the crucial example is uh, trade agreements, FDI, foreign direct investments, and economic sanctions. That's a crucial example of things that we should definitely start reading about. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Then the other aspects of foreign policy that we need to understand, and here since our core thematic focus for the model UN will be on green technologies, I think the second point here will make a lot of sense for us. But before that, security and defense policy. So for a country, you have to understand their security policy and their defense policy, and that includes, for instance, for an alliance like NATO, peacekeeping missions of a country, like we talked about the South African peacekeeping mission, uh, their military interventions, their defense treaties. So how are they dealing with external threats from terrorism, from military aggressions, from even cyber attacks? Uh, Okay. Then the next one is environmental and climate policy. Now, this has become a lot more relevant, so when we say international relations, the whole field of international relations, international politics became very, very prominent after the World War One. Like till that time, a lot of countries, a lot of people were not really focused on studying international relations, studying foreign policy. But after World War One, foreign policy became a very nuanced kind of a space where understanding if you're not clear on your foreign policy and that could lead to a world war, so that was not considered very good. But climate and environmental policy is, I would say, the most recent in its relative sense issue that has become very, very clear and prominent when it comes to foreign policy. So here we are looking at international cooperation to address global environmental issues such as climate change, biodiversity, sustainable development. If you remember, we had discussed in our last session, we talked about the Kyoto Protocol. We had talked about Paris Agreement. We'd also talked about the Montreal Protocol, about the ozone layer. So these are some of the examples, and you need to start finding out, as someone has very rightly said, that South Africa is a party to the Paris Agreement. So if you have South Africa and if you're doing climate change, so you must read about all the treaties, all the climate related things that South Africa has done, all the treaties they have signed as well. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. Human rights and humanitarian policy. So, promoting and protecting human rights globally, often through diplomatic pressure and international law. So, this I think is this is something that is happening right now for all the countries, including, for instance, South Africa, which is advocating so much and so strongly for Palestinians. It is not about making money. South Africa is not getting any monetary benefits from Palestinians. South Africa is not getting any other kind of influence. The only thing that South Africa is getting out of that is their human rights and humanitarian policy. So this is something that is a very, very great example of South Africa's support for Palestinians and their human rights. Like I think yesterday, Mr. Ramaphosa said in very clear words that we do not want to see another apartheid in happening, which is happening with the Palestinians. So that is the kind of human rights and humanitarian policy that you can already understand. Then we have the cultural and public diplomacy. Culture is where countries are trying to create positive diplomacy or a positive image through their culture. I don't know how many of you follow this thing called K-pop. If you do follow K-pop, like you can give a thumbs up. Or K-pop is uh, K-pop means the South Korean pop music, right? BTS is one example. So when people are reading, are listening to like Korean pop, in effect, they're also coming across the Korean culture and they start sort of understanding or becoming more sympathetic or friendly, or they feel more association to that particular culture. And that's a form of like, a positive association from culture. So similarly, when you see a Voice of America, you will see, like scholarship programs. India also have a lot. India has this whole like study abroad program that India. In fact, I saw that a lot of lot of students from African countries are coming to India to study, and that is one way that India is creating its own like cultural diplomacy. Within that. Um, yeah, so that is one example. Yeah, that's a really great example. Squid Games, like Squid Games, really put Korea on the map. And I think one another example of Spain can be your that Money Heist. If I don't know if you've seen this show called Money Heist. Money Heist was another very, very prominent show which kind of put the whole Spanish cinema, Spanish filmmaking and all on the global map. Or yeah, so that's another example. But cultural and public diplomacy is not just related to like culture. It can also be sports, by the way. Like for instance, when South Africa hosted the World Cup, and when Shakira sang that song back then in Waka Waka and the whole like video for South Africa came out, it was a huge moment. And for instance, even Nelson Mandela's respect around the whole world, that's another way of looking at cultural diplomacy. And that way, India and South Africa share a very, very strong connect because of Gandhi and Mandela, both of them, as being important symbols of freedom struggle. So cultural diplomacy is also sometimes about your historical ties. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Soft power. That's a great word that you've introduced to the discussion. Yes, this is a country sometimes have what we call as a soft power. Uh, Soft power basically means the power of diplomacy, the power of culture that influence you are able to, exercise. So that is that. Then the next one is multilateralism and global governance. So like we have talked about Namibia's role in more recently getting the Pact of the Future passed, or Germany's role, that is the multilateralism and global governance. So you have to see what kind of regional agreements does your country have, what kind of participation it has towards all of these forums. Is it actively negotiating things, or how are they doing it? Okay. And then we have something called as the intelligence and information policy. So here you're looking at how intelligence organizations, intelligence agencies are, basically conducting themselves. How the cybersecurity is happening, how diplomacy is being done in that regard. And one of the examples that you can see is like you have all these intelligence sharing networks between countries. What happens is that certain countries have agreements that whatever intelligence they are gathering, they will share it with another partner country, and so on and so forth. So NATO, for instance, will have its own intelligence sharing wing, which will do that. So that is the other aspect of foreign policy. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, development and foreign aid. So we have already talked about this one, and then legal treaties, and so this one we've already talked about as well, like legal and treaty frameworks, like international law and international treaties. So we extensively discussed it in the previous session as well. So which of the countries, which of the treaties have you signed? Which ones do you advocate for the most, and so on. So that is like another couple of aspects of foreign policy that you should definitely read about. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now adherence to foreign policy is essential in an MUN. These are a couple of like few points that are important for us to note. That if you violate your foreign policy, that means that everyone broadly understands the foreign policy of a particular country. Your chairperson who is governing the discussion will also know what the foreign policy of your country is. If you are not adhering to that foreign policy, if you're not following that foreign policy, your points are deducted. So your points are cancelled. If you've got any positive points, you are marked down upon when you violate your foreign policy. Okay. The second is that if you understand your foreign policy, it helps you understand who your allies should be in the committee and what your interest should be on an issue. Like I already talked about the purpose of foreign policy. So knowing your foreign policy well in an MUN helps you do that. And also knowing other countries' foreign policy is also very helpful. So that will enable you to understand that yes, you want to be friendly with a particular country, but are they interested in being friendly with you? So that is another crucial part of foreign policy. Okay. Uh, then is that last session we had discussed about negotiation framework, like creating your own negotiation framework. So this understanding of foreign policy is very, very important within that negotiation framework. And finally, your bloc formation. Bloc, BLOC. Bloc means those group of countries which are particularly supporting a set of solutions together. So those countries which are voting for a resolution together, that is what a bloc is. So if you understand your foreign policy very well, then you know with whom you are making your blocks and with whom you're writing your resolutions. Okay. I'll just take the question before we move forward. Is this foreign aid helpful to developing countries because of these aid accumulated debts? Okay. That's a very important question about foreign aid and its impact on a particular country. I think you have to understand that how sometimes a foreign aid is structured. See, a foreign aid can also can be structured as a debt. Yes, it can be structured as a debt. In which case, that if your country is economic growth is not, you know, not happening in the same way that we had initially, like you had projected. In that case, definitely a aid that comes in the form of a long-term debt can become a liability for you. Sometimes the aid is not really, and here there is something I am just putting it in the chat for all of you, where we call what we call as a conditional aid. Conditional aid is the aid that comes with conditions, where whoever is granting you the money will tell you, okay, we need to do X, Y, Z, five things, and that is how we will allow you to get aid. Okay, now here, let me take like a very important contrast with you. Like for instance, this happened with, this is also happening right now. Like for instance, certain countries, Scandinavian countries, what they do is that they will want to give aid to a particular country, which gives uh, which has more LGBTQI rights. Okay, so they will basically tell a country that okay, you relax the LGBTQI rights, you give them freedom, and we will give you like XYZ amount of money as a interest-free debt. So you can return it at whatever time, and we will give you that, but you have to basically culturally sort of change your ways. Okay. On the other hand, a China will come and tell you that we do not want to interfere with your culture, but we want to monopolize your markets. So we will do all the infrastructure building for you. We will do all this entire infrastructure development, but we want access to your markets. Uh, so that is, these are the sort of two different ways. One is a cultural kind of a interference. The other is a economic kind of an interference. So aid can come through these different reasons. A third one can be when like sometimes countries are saying that okay, you vote for us in this particular resolution, and you particularly support these 5 points, and we will like in the lieu of that we will give you money. So aid can come in different forms, but again, like I think this thing that you have said, nothing is free, is really the essence of international relations. That all of this aid comes mostly with a lot of different kind of expectations and influences. So countries have to be very careful about how to take that aid. And trust me, like countries have learned. So now nobody is just blindly taking aid because they know that okay, these are the problems that can definitely happen. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so you do remember now we have just concluded our foreign policy conversation. Now I'm just coming back to our discussion briefly that we had the last time about developing a viewpoint. So now I'm talking to you from now that we have understood foreign policy and international relations. Now we are trying to integrate that into developing a viewpoint. And this is from a research perspective that we did the last time around. Okay. Uh, so the first one is that developing a viewpoint, as you remember, we've talked about like the importance of developing this viewpoint. It helps you understand deeply about your country, its interest, its relationship with other countries. And this is where your foreign policy, right, becomes very, very important. Uh, Developing a viewpoint is much broader than simply researching. So, like, I think now you have understood, I'm hoping that now you have understood more about uh, how you develop a viewpoint and how do you understand your foreign policy while developing your viewpoint, right? Uh, So once you start understanding your foreign policy, then you can very sharpen like that viewpoint. You know exactly from where you're talking about. The next is a specific viewpoint is vital to deciding your analysis of the agenda. So, like in terms of once you understand your foreign policy, you know what line of solutions you can take from your agenda. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So all of this information that we discussed the last time, like, geographical, social, economic, political aspects of your country, regional, historical context of your country, its alliances, global cooperation mechanisms, foreign policy, key statistics, all of them, they will help you start extracting and understanding the foreign policy of your particular country when it is allotted to you. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this we have already talked about. Like now, put this foreign policy discussion in context of understanding the key principles, priorities, beliefs, short-term and long-term goals of your country, its view towards other countries, international institutions, its influence on international politics, and the focus on global affairs. Okay. Next slide, please. Right. So if you do remember last time, like we had discussed this, that in terms of the valid sources of research, uh, some of the slides that you can, some of the websites you can use to understand, and these will remain the same even for foreign policy, whether it's your UN websites or it is your government websites or it is these multilateral forums. So the media. So these are broadly the sources that we are using to understand the foreign policy. Now, David, is it possible for us to just visit our the foreign policy section of our platform, please? There is a chapter that we have created. If we can just go to that page, please.
Okay, let me have a look quickly. Is
Yeah.
it on our MOOC site?
Yes, it's on our MOOC page. Yes.
Yes, let me quickly go there right now. So just to show the students, guys, so the MOOC site. Let me just, oh gosh, it's still running. Let me just stop. Okay,
Sorry
there we go.
for throwing these surprises at you today.
Nah, it's fine. So there we go, guys. So you'll see I've shared this in the link. So you guys will be able to log in and you just use your My Life details. All right. So where is the page? You'll have to help
Let's scroll down. Let's scroll down, please. Yeah. So you see the foreign policy section here. Yeah. Can you please click on the researching just examples of foreign policy, please? Sorry, examples of foreign policy. Yes. So I just want to show you that a lot of foreign policy, has been studied a lot by people. And when it is studied, people have documented it. And, people have given like particular sort of names, phenomenons in terms of what we call as the doctrines of foreign policy, right? So the first one, for instance, it says is the Monroe Doctrine. So this example is from the US. First one, which is a doctrine that says that basically, any interference to any attempt towards interference to these European countries is considered an interference with the US. So anything that happens like Ukraine, when you see broadly is coming from this whole idea, the Monroe Doctrine. The whole NATO's idea also comes from that like thinking. So similarly, like the first section I've mentioned here is the US section. Then can we can we go to the next section, please? Like you see China, Soviet Union here. Then we have the African section. So here we have the Mandela Doctrine, for instance, which talks about South Africa's commitment to peace, conflict resolution, social justice, domestically and within the African continent. So one can say that this whole action that South Africa has taken against Israel in the ICJ is an extension of the Mandela Doctrine. Okay. Similarly, with Senegal, you see the African Renaissance. You can see non-alignment and Pan-Africanism with Ghana. So we have tried to basically take examples, and the reason I'm taking you through a lot of this is so that after our session, you're able to go to this place and understand it. Okay. Can we go to the next, can we scroll down, please? Yeah, then I've also given Asia a little bit of, so we have like this look east policy from India. We have, all of these different principles from Asia. And then we have Latin America as well. If we can just scroll down, please. Latin America, we see Mexico, we see Argentina, Venezuela, and you have to do all of this research yourself. I've just tried to take very few, if you can see. Next slide, next one, please. Yeah. And Europe, finally. Like some of the, we have tried to take foreign policy examples. Okay, so let's close our presentation. Let's close our window for now. And I'll just talk to you quickly about, firstly, I hope that you've enjoyed today's session and you've understood broadly about foreign policy. If you have, I think reactions will be very helpful. And I would love to hear from you on the chat in terms of what were a couple of things that you really that you understood today, and like what really helped you in today's session. I'll be very happy to kind of, like it'll help us understand the learnings from today. Okay, so in the meantime, while you're writing, uh, I'll take a couple of questions. So how can we say that there is a UN while discrimination is being aggressively exercised? Okay, important question. Um, See, again, like yesterday, I was talking to, if you remember, actually, I was talking to somebody at the UN, and I was discussing this whole idea that, UN is discussing the future as while like Lebanon, like people are dying, and 500, 600 people died just yesterday in Lebanon. So what is the UN doing? And one of the important things that sort of was mentioned to me was that a lot of people at the UN, like uh, they are very helpless because the countries which are a part, like members of the UN themselves, are not really following the principles of the UN. So that way, UN, what can it really do if countries are not listening to each other? So that is where you can see that, yes, a lot of problems, and I think the whole issue of poverty, human rights, so many levels of discrimination is happening. Uh, and that is a big question mark on the UN, which takes me to the next one, which is my personal viewpoint on the future of the UN. I think that if the UN needs to become more relevant in the future, it needs to undergo a lot of reform. And what's happening currently at the UN is a lot of voices of developing countries are generally being undermined. So I think because of like a lot of these issues like climate change, hunger, and disasters, they will become more and more relevant in the future because of the direction we are heading towards. Uh, UN definitely will be needed in terms of coordination of humanitarian issues. But I think till the time this whole Security Council reform doesn't happen, and countries get aligned on international peace and security, you will continue to see these issues like the Ukraine war and the Israel-Palestine conflict. And even like right now in Africa, there are a couple of conflicts which are raging. So I think that's that. And if I think there's a possibility of a nuclear war, you never know. I think at this point, wherever things are, although I do feel that we have seen these kind of situations. It's not very, I'd say, unprecedented what is happening today. When you look at the history of the UN, we had these wars. Iran, Iraq was like Kuwait. So many wars have already happened. But I think nuclear weapons is one place where still, like, countries are still very, very careful. But do I think more countries will want to possess nuclear weapons? Yes, because Ukraine disbanded its nuclear program when it signed the NPT, and now a lot of like conversations in these circles is that if Ukraine had nuclear weapons, maybe they wouldn't have seen so much of an intervention. But I want to very quickly just tell you about this concept, which is called as um, I'm just typing it in the chat for all of you, which is called as MAD, MAD. MAD means mutually assured destruction. So what that basically means is that if you use nuclear weapons, then somebody will also use nuclear weapons against you. So that whole idea of deterrence, because if you use a nuclear weapon, it can be used against you, is what usually keeps people away from using nuclear weapons. So that is that. Uh, yeah. Okay. I'll take this last comment that you have mentioned. Uh, uh, the about this the whole civil war, cold wars, honestly, like, I can tell you for sure that there are there are over, I think, 200-300 UN officials who have died so far in this whole Israel Palestine conflict, and even with the bombings in Lebanon yesterday, there are UN officials which were killed. So the UN is not blind to these issues at all. Like, in fact, many people I've spoken to are extremely sort of frustrated about the whole process. But because UN is a member-led organization, that means that members have to decide what to do. Uh, a lot of times, you will see that UN is unable to act on issues, and that happens because of the veto power as well. So that's that. Now, I know we are reaching our concluding time. David, I just wanted to clarify this to you as well as everyone else. We have one more session to go. So this is not our last session.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
I was going to
Because,
actually ask you, but that's great then.
yeah.
Thanks, Keshav.
Yeah. Our next session will be about how do we write UN resolutions? How do we take this discussion? How do we take all these points and then we convert them into these legal languages and all of that? So we will be practicing, and I will be taking you through the whole process of how resolutions are adopted at the UN. Okay. I will take all the comments again. I know this chat is saved with us, so I'll be happy to take these questions in our next session. But I'm just so grateful to all of you for being with us. And my one recommendation will be, please go to YouTube or the UN website and the UN General Assembly. Just type, like, I'm putting it in the chat for all of you. Just type like UNGA live, and uh, you will just find information there. And yeah, if you want to connect further, again, like LinkedIn, Instagram, wherever, I'm happy to connect with you all. So yeah, thank you so much, David. Big thank you to you once again for keeping everything so smooth and for dealing with all the surprises I sent your way for the video and the website.
Okay,
Over
Chef,
to you.
it's always a pleasure. That's what we do. We jump around and get things done, but it was really awesome. Very interesting session once more. I'm actually very happy that there's another session next week. I thought this was the last one. So yes, guys, next week we'll be back again, same time. We will post out an announcement, and any other developments, we'll also go through the MOOCs announcement. I just posted it again in the chat, guys. Please remember, this is not just for UNISA students. So even people that you know outside of UNISA, they are able to create a free account and access these resources. This is an open website that Adolf provides, so we really do appreciate your attendance. And of course, all the comments that flood in. It's so many comments. I think Kevchef would really enjoyed this engagement, and I'm glad to see the engagement from the students. So guys, have a lovely evening further wherever you are in the world. Kevchef, good night. And then we'll see you guys next week again. All the best. Thanks, guys.